Cole Harrison never imagined that sharing a plate of scrambled eggs with a stranger on a stormy morning could change the course of his entire life. He was just a former Navy SEAL trying to survive with honor, raising his daughter alone while battling overdue bills and the invisible weight of reintegrating into civilian life. That drenched woman, trembling with pain and loss, had no money, no name, nothing except the desperate need for someone to see her as a human being. Cole gave the little he had. Weeks later, men in suits knocked on his door with a revelation no one could have predicted. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories of faith, honor, and redemption. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning. The rain was coming down hard on the North Carolina coast that November morning, drumming on the metal roof of this small roadside diner as if it wanted to wash all the world's dirt away at once. Cole Harrison parked his old truck in front of the establishment, turned off the engine, and paused for a few seconds, watching the drops stream down the windshield as he tried to organize his thoughts for the day. He had just dropped Mia off at school, and now he needed a quick breakfast before heading off to another day of odd jobs around town, trying to scrape together enough money to cover the overdue rent and the bills piled up on the kitchen table. Life as a former Navy SEAL hadn't prepared Cole for the daily battle of surviving away from the uniform, away from the military structure, away from the sense of purpose he carried when he wore the trident insignias. But he had Mia, and as long as she was okay, he knew he could keep fighting, even if that fight was silent, invisible, and waged inside a cheap diner in a town that barely knew his name. When Cole walked into the diner, the smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon filled his nostrils, bringing a comforting sense of normalcy that he hadn't felt in days. The place was simple, with torn red vinyl booths in some corners, formica tables stained by time, and large windows that showed the storm outside in all its gray force. There were few customers at that hour, a solitary truck driver in the corner, an elderly couple sharing toast, and the usual waitress who nodded at Cole with a tired but genuine smile. He sat at the counter, ordered the cheapest breakfast on the menu, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, and began to mentally count how much money he had left in his wallet for the rest of the week. The budget was too tight for a man who had once carried life-or-death missions on his shoulders, but now every cent counted, and Cole felt the weight of that responsibility like a 100-pound backpack he couldn't take off. It was then that the diner door burst open, letting in a gust of cold wind and rain that made everyone present turn their heads at the same time. A woman stumbled in, soaked from head to toe, her hair plastered to her face, her clothes heavy with water and torn in a few places, as if she had been through a storm much bigger than the one falling from the sky. She stopped just past the door, breathing hard, her hands visibly trembling as she tried to orient herself in the room. Cole felt his stomach clench as soon as he saw her eyes, empty, lost, carrying a kind of pain he recognized immediately because he had seen that same look on the faces of comrades who returned from missions where they lost more than they could count. The woman didn't seem drunk or high, but completely broken, as if she had left pieces of herself scattered somewhere no one else could reach. The waitress approached her cautiously, asking if everything was all right, but the woman only shook her head slightly, unable to form coherent words. Cole watched as she dragged herself to an empty table near the window, sitting down heavily as if she barely had the strength to stand. She crossed her arms on the table and lowered her head, trembling from the cold and from something deeper that the cold rain couldn't explain. No one in the diner knew what to do. The truck driver returned to his plate, the elderly couple whispered something to each other, and the waitress stood still, torn between compassion and the fear of getting involved in something she didn't understand. But Cole couldn't look away from that woman, because something inside him, perhaps the protective instinct he carried since his SEAL days, perhaps the memory of all the times he himself had felt lost, told him he needed to do something, even if he didn't know exactly what. He looked at the plate the waitress had just placed in front of him, Still warm eggs, crispy toast, steaming coffee. Cole knew this would be his only breakfast for the day, and that after this he would have to wait until night to eat again. But when he looked again at the drenched woman, trembling alone at that table, he felt that her hunger was greater than his, and that at that specific moment, he had the chance to do something that truly mattered. Without thinking much, without calculating the financial or emotional consequences, Cole called the waitress and asked her to take the plate to the woman. The waitress hesitated, asking if he was sure, and Cole simply nodded, saying she seemed to need it more than he did. When the plate arrived at the woman's table, she slowly raised her eyes, confused, as if she couldn't process what was happening. The waitress pointed to Cole at the counter, and their eyes met for a long second that seemed to carry more weight than 1,000 words could express. The woman tried to say something, but her voice came out hoarse, broken, unable to form gratitude or explanation. Cole just nodded slightly, as if to say, "It's okay. You don't need to say anything," and returned to looking at his own empty coffee cup in front of him. He didn't want recognition, didn't want thanks, didn't want to turn that gesture into something bigger than it was. Just one man helping another human being in the middle of a storm. The woman began to eat slowly, her hands still trembling as she held the fork, and Cole realized she wasn't just physically hungry, but deeply emotionally hungry. A desperate need to feel that someone cared, that someone still saw humanity in her even when she herself couldn't see it anymore. He finished his coffee in silence, paid the bill with the last bills he had in his wallet, and got up to leave, knowing he had to get on with his day and couldn't stay there asking questions or waiting for answers. But before leaving, he looked one last time at the woman and saw that she was crying softly as she ate, her tears mixed with the rainwater that still ran down her face. That squeezed Cole's chest in a way he didn't expect, but he knew he had done the right thing, even if it meant going hungry for the day and going home without answers. Leaving the diner and returning to the rain that continued to fall hard on the small coastal town, Cole felt a strange weight on his chest, a mix of worry and uncertainty that he couldn't name. He didn't know who that woman was, where she had come from, or what had broken her that way. But he knew, deep in his soul, that this encounter had not been accidental, that something bigger than he could comprehend at that moment had placed them both in the same place, at the same time, under the same storm. Cole got into the truck, started the engine, and began to drive through the empty streets, feeling the rain hit the glass as he tried to push the image of those lost eyes from his mind. But no matter how hard he tried to focus on the day's work, on the daughter waiting for him at home at night, on the bills that needed to be paid, he couldn't stop thinking about that woman, and what might happen to her after she left that diner. The silence inside the diner made every noise almost solemn, the occasional clinking of cups, the distant hum of the persistent rain beating on the glass, the muffled sound of tires passing on the wet road outside. Emily Carter, even protected from the torment outside, maintained the expression of someone still in the midst of a true inner hurricane. With the plate in front of her, she tried to control the trembling of her hands, breathing deeply like someone fighting to stand only with the strength of hope that seemed almost extinguished. The first few forkfuls were hesitant, as if she needed to convince herself that she deserved that unexpected help. Gradually, the food and the gesture of compassion began to warm more than her body. They brought a fleeting glimpse of dignity to her wounded and exhausted soul. Cole, sitting unrecognized at the counter, discreetly watched as Emily slowly, inch by inch, recovered an appearance of normalcy. He knew well what it was like to be hanging on the thread of survival, depending on the kindness of strangers or often the complete indifference of the crowd. Cole's military eye noticed every detail, her eyes red with fatigue and suffering, the way she tried to maintain her posture despite her body crying out for rest, and her arms crossed over her stomach as if protecting a deep emptiness. It was impossible not to feel a genuine identification, as if they were connected by an invisible wound that only those who have known the weight of the world could see. Meanwhile, The waitress maintained a respectful distance, sensing the density of the scene and understanding that the best thing was not to intervene beyond what was necessary. Emily forced herself to look around, trying to locate herself in time and space. There was something almost sacred about that small American coastal town diner, where conservative customs and respect for national symbols were as visible as the miniature flags in the windows and the portraits of veterans hung on the walls. A kind of silent morality hovered over everyone who shared the space, the certainty that, no matter how difficult life was, no one should cross it completely alone. This same community spirit, so absent in big centers but alive in every anonymous gesture inside, weighed on Emily's chest, awakening in her a mixture of strangeness, longing, and a desire to belong. Even so, the barrier between her and the rest of the world seemed insurmountable. The trauma of what she had witnessed, the inheritance of family expectations, the pressure of carrying such intense stories on her documentary filmmaker's back, seemed to steal her voice every time she tried to give thanks. It was Cole who broke that suffocating silence. Moving away from the counter, he walked to her table and sat down across from her, with the naturalness of someone who learned to respect the pain of others without ever invading it. The look they exchanged was filled with everything that didn't need to be said, mutual recognition between soldiers wounded by different, but equally deep, battles. Cole offered only a few words, quietly asking if she needed anything else, but delivering solid, almost unbreakable support in his tone and gaze. Emily, initially resistant, finally accepted that momentary shelter. She responded with difficulty, giving thanks, breaking into a few sentences between tears and nervous laughter, letting slip subtle details of an impossible emotional routine. Inhospitable places, suffering people, pain and hope recorded in every story she registers with her camera. Cole listened to everything without judgment, only conveying understanding and respect. He understood that sometimes all someone needs is to be heard and perceived as a person, not as just another lost cause on a list of unsolvable problems. For a few minutes, they shared stories and silences, punctuated by looks of respect and compassion, transforming the initial discomfort into a delicate alliance, improbable but real. Emily's sadness slowly began to give way to a strange feeling, gratitude for being helped precisely at her peak of vulnerability. It wasn't just the food or the hot coffee, but the simple fact that someone was dedicating attention without expecting anything in return, as if Cole were continuing the silent oath of those who serve the country, to protect those who can no longer fight alone. Behind all the visible strength of the former Navy SEAL, she also saw the fissures of a soul marked by the same doubts and the same desire to rediscover meaning, something they shared without ever having planned to. Time seemed to stretch in the diner, each second carrying a depth that words couldn't keep up with. Emily looked around, realizing for the first time in weeks that there was still space in real life for simple gestures of humanity, to honor, serve, protect, and welcome. It was as if that small episode helped to reactivate in her heart the hope of belonging somewhere again, of trusting again in the promise of community, faith, and the bonds that survive even the greatest storms. As the clock advanced and the movement in the diner increased, Emily tried to absorb the maximum of that momentary shelter. She knew that when she left, she would face the internal demons and external pressures again, but now she carried with her a spark of renewed strength from the compassion of another. Cole, with his restrained and protective manner, said goodbye only with a firm handshake and a discreet smile, quietly encouraging Emily to continue resisting. Leaving her there, he knew that, no matter how small his material possessions were, he had donated what he had most valuable, his integrity, his time, and his whole heart in the face of another's pain. On that rainy morning, amidst two broken trajectories, a silent bond was born that would never be broken by social distances or differences in origin. Cole's gesture was not only etched in Emily, it resonated in the air as a reminder that in small American towns, There is still room for unpretentious goodness, for silent protection, and for the faith that everyone deserves a second chance. When Emily left the diner, she was far from healed, but now she carried with her a new seed, planted by the compassion of a stranger who, just for an instant, became the most important person in the world to her. The day after the encounter at the diner, the routine in the small coastal town seemed to continue without news, but something had changed silently and irreversibly for Cole Harrison. The image of Emily Carter, fragile and grateful, would not leave his mind, lingering in the air like the memory of a restless dream. Cole tried to focus on the small household repairs and temporary jobs that guaranteed a bit of dignity to the life he led with Mia. But every sound of a storm evoked the memories of the woman he had helped the day before without even knowing her name. Days passed and Emily's presence disappeared from the diner's daily life. Neither the waitress nor the usual customers could give any news of her. Cole, accustomed to dealing with disappearances since his service days, felt a type of worry arise that was a mixture of guilt, responsibility, and helplessness. He wondered if he shouldn't have done more, called someone, tried to get some contact information from her, or even insisted that she accept a ride to the police station or a local shelter. However, respecting the pain of others was also part of his code of honor, and Cole tried to comfort himself by recalling the look of relief Emily had given him before leaving. Mia, even small, noticed the different weight in her father's eyes, and asked a few times about the reason for his sudden distraction. Cole avoided the subject with vague answers, protecting his daughter from issues that only broken adults understand. Still, while helping her with schoolwork or preparing dinner, he perceived himself as more introspective, carrying a growing restlessness difficult to translate into words. The mystery of Emily's disappearance grew in Cole's chest precisely because it was filled with unanswered questions, and the absence of news made the day longer and more silent. From time to time, after an especially difficult day, Cole would park in front of the diner, hesitating before going in. The place served as a reference point for a hope that was escaping through his fingers, and secretly, he hoped Emily would return at least to reassure him that she was well. Every time the door opened and a stranger arrived, his heart raced for an instant, until he was taken over again by disappointment. As far as he knew, no one else in that town even suspected her existence. At work, Cole was reluctant to comment on the episode with old acquaintances, fearing to seem obsessed or weak for worrying so much about a stranger. But deep down, he recognized that this care was part of what made him human, built by years of learning inside and outside military service, always guided by the compass of compassion. Instead, he channeled the feeling into the search for small acts of kindness in everyday life, trying to transform that unresolved anxiety into something productive for Mia and the community around them. Nights were particularly difficult. The silence of the house, accentuated by the distant sound of the sea and occasional storms, served as a stage for insistent thoughts. Cole sought distraction by reading stories to Mia, mentally answering all the unasked questions, as if he could thus fill, even if for a few minutes, the emptiness caused by Emily's disappearance. He always returned to the last scene of the encounter, trying to remember details, her tired expression, the broken words, anything that could give him a clue about the destiny of the woman who had appeared and vanished like a ghost. With each new day, the mystery seemed to deepen. No one called, no one sent a message, no new clue appeared. Cole alternated between wanting news and fearing the worst, imagining scenarios from a courageous new beginning to tragic outcomes. The world's indifference to the fate of someone so wounded hurt deeply in a man who knew the value of solidarity on the battlefield. Still, the silent certainty persisted that he had fulfilled his duty as an honorable man and veteran. While trying to accept the unknown, Cole clung to routine as a way to find stability in the face of the emotional turmoil. There were small victories, sweet conversations with Mia, the silent respect of the neighbors, and even a timid hope that everything, sooner or later, would make sense. Still, deep down, The feeling that something simply hadn't concluded in that story was impossible to ignore. The emptiness left by Emily was not physical, but existential. More than longing or compassion, there was the urgency for confirmation. Was a simple gesture of kindness really enough to change a destiny? Or was it just a fleeting relief for the conscience? Cole asked himself that question countless times, somehow waiting for an answer that only time, and perhaps Emily herself, could bring him one day. The weeks that followed Emily's disappearance were marked by a routine that Cole Harrison tried to maintain with military discipline, but which never seemed enough to erase the restlessness growing in his chest. Every morning, he woke up before dawn, prepared breakfast for Mia, took her to school, and then went to the temporary jobs he could find around the coastal town, small repairs, loading and unloading at the port, manual labor that paid little but kept his dignity intact. Life had to go on, and Cole knew that better than anyone. But there was something different now, something that weighed silently on every automatic gesture of his daily life. During work, Cole found moments of distraction when talking to other veterans in the area, men who were also struggling to reintegrate into civilian life after years of serving the country. They shared stories of missions, lost comrades, and battles they could never fully explain to those who had never worn the uniform. But even in those moments of genuine connection, Cole felt he carried an additional weight he couldn't share with anyone: the image of Emily, trembling and lost in that diner, and the growing feeling that he should have done more, asked more, insisted more. It was as if, by letting her leave without guarantees that she would be okay, he had failed to fulfill the silent oath he carried since his SEAL days, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Nights were particularly difficult, because that was when Cole's mind was free to wander without the commitments and distractions of the day. After putting Mia to sleep, he would sit on the porch of the simple house, watching the ocean in the distance and listening to the sound of the waves breaking on the coast. It was a sound that normally brought peace, but now it only intensified the feeling of incompleteness that dominated his thoughts. Cole would find himself replaying every detail of that encounter at the diner. The words Emily had tried to say between tears, the look of gratitude mixed with despair, the way she had disappeared without leaving a trace. He tried to convince himself that he had done enough, that a gesture of kindness was already more than most people would do. But the voice of moral responsibility spoke louder, reminding him that Emily was clearly in emotional danger and that he had simply let her go. The local community, small and conservative, functioned as a silent support network that Cole had learned to value since he moved there with Mia. Neighbors greeted him with respectful nods, the church offered help without judgment, and the diner continued to be the meeting place where stories were shared and lives were woven together. But even surrounded by this network of belonging, Cole felt isolated in his worry for Emily, because no one else besides him and the waitress had actually witnessed the state she was in that rainy morning. It was like carrying a secret too heavy to share, but too important to forget. Mia, with her childlike innocence, brought moments of genuine relief to Cole, reminding him that there was still beauty and hope in the world, despite all the pain he carried. When she came home from school excited, telling stories about her friends and the drawings she made in class, Cole felt his heart warm and his determination to keep fighting renewed. He knew that everything he did, every day of hard work, every financial sacrifice, every sleepless night, was to ensure that Mia had a better life than his, a life where she could grow up safe, loved, and protected from the storms he knew so well. But even in those moments of paternal tenderness, the ghost of Emily returned, whispering unanswered questions and making Cole wonder if one day he would know what really happened to that woman. Sundays were dedicated to church, where Cole took Mia to services and found some comfort in the words about faith, redemption, and purpose. The local pastor, an elderly man who was also a veteran, often preached about the importance of doing good without expecting return, of acting with integrity even when no one is watching, and of trusting that God sees every gesture of compassion and rewards it at the right time. Cole listened to those words attentively, trying to absorb some inner peace, but always ended with the same silent question. Was Emily safe? Was the gesture of kindness he offered enough to make a real difference in her life? Despite all the uncertainty, Cole refused to regret helping Emily that morning. Even if it meant going hungry for the day, even if it meant carrying endless worry, he knew he had made the right choice, the only possible choice for a man who still believed in honor, in duty, and in doing what is right simply because it is right. This conviction was what kept him standing when the doubts became too heavy, and it was what gave him the strength to continue each day, hoping that somehow, somewhere, Emily was finding her way back to the light. As the weeks passed, life followed its natural course in the small coastal town. The storms came and went, the tides rose and fell, and Cole continued working, taking care of Mia, and trying to rebuild a life that still felt unfinished. But deep in his heart, he knew that something fundamental had changed that rainy morning at the diner, and that until the mystery about Emily was resolved, a part of him would remain trapped in that moment, waiting, worried, and silently hopeful that one day the truth would come out and the cycle would finally close. Time continued its usual flow in the coastal town, until the day when, between one job and another, Cole heard someone knocking on the door of the simple house where he lived with Mia. It wasn't common to receive unexpected visitors, much less at that hour. The rhythmic sound of the knocking brought a tightness to his chest, a feeling of anticipation he had felt at other decisive moments in his life. He wiped his hands, greasy from working on the car, and opened the door suspiciously, finding himself faced with two men in suits, one of them holding a folder, the other a gleaming badge with the name Robert Carter Foundation for Veterans. The visitors introduced themselves courteously, mentioning that they wouldn't take up much of Cole's time, but that they were coming on behalf of the foundation founded in honor of Robert Carter, a decorated Navy SEAL from Virginia. When they heard Cole confirm that he was the one they were looking for, the older one opened the folder carefully and explained, "We are here because your name was mentioned by someone of extreme confidence. Emily Carter, the founder's granddaughter, asked us to seek you out." The simple mention of Emily's name chilled Cole's blood. It was as if all the mystery that had hung over him for weeks had finally found a crack through which to reveal itself. While Mia played in the yard, the representatives reported to Cole that Emily had gone through a severe emotional episode, and before absenting herself from family life again, she left detailed instructions in case something happened to her. Among these instructions was an account of who had been responsible for offering her a gesture of compassion in one of the darkest periods of her life. "Emily says you didn't hesitate to help without knowing who she was. That has a very important value for our family." Cole felt a mixture of relief, fear, and disbelief. Emily's name echoed as both an answer and a new enigma. In the face of the attentive eyes of the representatives and the weight of the moment, Cole tried to quietly explain what he had done for Emily in that gray diner. There was no flourish, nor attempts to exaggerate the gesture, just a simple explanation, filled with the sincerity of someone who believes in the fundamental value of integrity. The visitors listened carefully, making light notes and reiterating how much the Carter family valued not only what Cole had done, but mainly who he was, an honorable man, dedicated to his daughter, proud of his military past, and rigid in principles. For an instant, Cole felt small in the face of that revelation. Until then, he had only seen Emily as a lost soul, without imagining that behind all the vulnerability there was a powerful story connected to the legacy of a respected patriotic family throughout the state of Virginia. The mystery about her disappearance gained new layers and ramifications, making everything even denser with meaning. Now he understood that the gesture of kindness had crossed invisible boundaries, connecting destinies in ways neither of the involved could foresee. With every answer from the visitors, new questions arose in Cole's mind. Why hadn't she returned yet? What exactly did the family intend by looking for him now? Was he about to be involved in something much bigger than he imagined? But above all, there was a feeling of silent honor, a confirmation that the world, even in the most improbable details, still recognized the importance of small acts of compassion. The atmosphere inside the house became heavy, loaded with a type of suspense that only those who have lived through battles can identify. The voice of the Foundation's representatives was serious and comforting. They spoke of responsibility, solidarity, and how the Carter family's mission was also to reiterate values and care for those who embodied them daily. Cole, humbly, replied that he never did anything expecting rewards, but that the restlessness about Emily's whereabouts had accompanied him since that morning. Before leaving, the representatives left a card and a formal invitation to appear at the Carter Foundation for Veterans in Richmond, Virginia. "The family wants to meet you, Mr. Harrison. They consider it a duty to give recognition and public thanks to those who preserve, honor even when no one is looking." The invitation left Cole divided between pride and apprehension, still not fully understanding all the implications of that unexpected chapter in his life. When they said goodbye, silence once again dominated the house. Cole looked through the glass at Mia playing innocently in the sun, feeling for the first time since Emily's disappearance a new hope, mixed with a deep respect for the strength of destinies intertwined by chance, duty, and compassion. He knew that wounds and doubts still remained, but also a certainty. That story was far from over, and for the first time, Cole felt ready to face it until the end. The trip to Richmond, Virginia, seemed endless for Cole Harrison, even though it took only a few hours of driving. He had left Mia in the care of a trusted neighbor, promising to return soon, but he carried in his chest a mixture of anxiety and hope that made him mentally review every detail of that encounter at the diner. As he drove along the coastal highway toward the interior of Virginia, he observed the small towns passing by, the American flags waving on the porches, the war memorials in central squares, all reminding him that he was about to enter a world very different from his own, but built on the same values of honor, sacrifice, and duty that he carried since his SEAL days. Upon arriving at the Robert Carter Foundation for Veterans, Cole felt the weight of American military history impregnated in every brick of the imposing building that stood before him. The classic construction, with white columns and impeccable gardens, seemed like a sanctuary dedicated to the memory of those who served the country, and commemorative plaques lined up at the entrance honored veterans of all generations. Cole parked his old truck next to luxury cars, feeling out of place but determined to finally discover the truth about Emily and what that gesture of kindness had really meant. One of the representatives who had visited him at home was waiting for him at the entrance, greeting him with a firm and respectful handshake, like someone recognizing an equal. As he was led through the silent corridors of the foundation, Cole observed the framed photographs on the walls, images of Robert Carter in his Navy SEAL uniform, decorated with medals, surrounded by comrades in arms, and in moments of family celebration. There were also more recent photos of the Carter family, charity events, patriotic ceremonies, meetings with authorities, all documenting a lineage of service and dedication that spanned generations. Cole felt he was about to come into contact with something much bigger than he had imagined, and the responsibility of that moment weighed on his shoulders like a backpack loaded with expectations. Finally, he was led to a spacious and elegant room, with a solid wood table in the center, American flags on the sides, and a large window overlooking the external gardens. Sitting around the table were three people, an older woman, with a dignified posture and penetrating gaze, who introduced herself as Margaret Carter, Robert Carter's widow, a family lawyer responsible for the Foundation's legal affairs. And to Cole's surprise, Emily Carter, pale and visibly fragile, but present. Cole's heart pounded when he saw her. All the weeks of worry, all the sleepless nights, all the unanswered questions finally found a real face in front of him. Margaret Carter was the first to speak, with a firm but emotionally charged voice. "Mr. Harrison, we are immensely grateful that you accepted our invitation." Emily told us about what you did for her on that terrible day, and we want you to know that this gesture did not go unnoticed by our family." Cole, still processing Emily's presence at the table, just nodded, not knowing exactly what to say. Margaret continued, explaining that Emily had spent years documenting stories of human suffering in conflict zones and natural disasters, carrying a deep emotional trauma that had finally broken her that rainy morning. She was running from everything and everyone, including us, her family, because she felt that no one truly understood the weight she was carrying. Emily, with a trembling but determined voice, looked directly at Cole and began to speak. "I don't remember everything from that day, but I remember you. I remember that you treated me like a person, not like a problem or someone who needed to be fixed. You gave me food, you gave me space, you gave me dignity when I had none of those things left." Tears began to stream down her face as she continued. "I was ready to give up on everything, but that simple gesture reminded me that there is still kindness in the world, that there are still good people who do the right thing simply because it is right." Cole felt his chest tighten, finally realizing the real weight of that moment at the diner and how a simple plate of food had meant much more than he could have ever imagined. Margaret resumed speaking, explaining that after that day, Emily had returned to the family and started intensive treatment to deal with the accumulated trauma. During this process, she insisted that the family find Cole and offer him the recognition he deserved, not just as personal thanks, but as a way to honor the values that the Robert Carter Foundation stood for: compassion, integrity, and the commitment to care for those who serve and protect. "My husband, Robert, always said that the true measure of a CAL is not just in the missions he completes, but in how he treats the most vulnerable when no one is watching. You, Mr. Harrison, embody exactly that." The lawyer then opened a folder and presented Cole with a formal document. The Carter family, through the foundation, was offering him a comprehensive veteran assistance scholarship, which included financial support for basic expenses, access to professional reintegration programs, educational coverage for Mia, and if he accepted, a position within the foundation itself, helping other veterans in similar situations. Cole was speechless, looking at the documents with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude that he could barely process. All of it seemed unreal, as if the universe were finally recognizing not only that specific gesture, but all the years of silent sacrifice he had lived. Emily got up from the table and approached Cole, extending her hand with a small envelope. "This is a letter I wrote to you during treatment. I wanted you to know how much that day changed my life and how you gave me a reason to keep fighting." Cole accepted the envelope with trembling hands, feeling for the first time in a long time that everything, the sacrifice, the pain, the uncertainty, had truly been worth it. Looking at Emily, he no longer saw the broken woman from that diner, but someone who was rebuilding her life piece by piece, just as he himself was doing. In that dignified and solemn room, Cole Harrison finally understood the magnitude of what had happened. A simple act of kindness had crossed invisible boundaries, connecting two wounded lives and creating a current of hope and redemption that would extend far beyond that day. The truth about Emily was not just about who she was or where she came from, but about the transformative power of human compassion, the only force capable of healing wounds that neither time nor money can reach. The drive back to North Carolina was completely different from the one Cole had made a few hours earlier. Now, with Emily's envelope on the passenger seat and the Carter Foundation documents carefully stored, he felt an enormous weight being lifted from his shoulders, a weight he had carried since that rainy morning at the diner, and indeed long before that. For the first time in years, Cole Harrison allowed himself to feel something he had forgotten: genuine hope that the future could be different, that the sacrifices had not been in vain, and that integrity was still recognized and valued even in a world that so often seemed indifferent. The sun was beginning to set over the rural roads of Virginia, illuminating golden fields and small white churches along the way. And Cole felt as if he was witnessing not just an ordinary sunset, but the closing of a painful chapter in his life. Arriving home, Mia ran to hug him with the contagious energy that only children possess, asking how the trip had been and if he was okay. Cole picked her up in his arms and for the first time in a long time, managed to smile with genuine tranquility, saying that everything was fine, better than fine, in fact. He didn't go into detail about everything that had happened in Richmond, but he promised Mia that good things were coming, that they would have more stability, that she could dream of a better future without worrying so much. That night, while preparing the simple dinner they always made together, Cole felt an inner peace he hadn't experienced in years, as if all the pieces of a complex puzzle were finally fitting into the right place. In the following weeks, Cole's life began to change in tangible and profound ways. The Carter Foundation fulfilled every promise made in that solemn room in Richmond. The financial support arrived punctually, allowing Cole to pay off the overdue debts and stop living on the financial razor's edge that had tormented him for so long. He began working as a mentor at the foundation itself, helping other veterans in the process of reintegrating into civilian life, sharing his experiences and offering the kind of support he himself would have wished to receive when he left the SEALs. Mia was enrolled in a better school, with resources and opportunities that Cole had never imagined he could provide alone. And he saw in his daughter's eyes a sparkle of happiness and security that was worth more than any money in the world. But more than the material changes, what truly transformed Cole was the understanding that his gesture of kindness that rainy morning had created a chain of impact that extended far beyond that isolated moment. Emily, who had received compassion when she needed it most, was now in recovery and gradually returning to work as a documentary filmmaker, but with a more balanced and conscious approach to her emotional limits. The Carter family, by honoring Cole, was also reaffirming the values that Robert Carter had defended throughout his military life, values of honor, sacrifice, and care for others. And Cole, by accepting the help and recognition, was allowing his story to inspire other veterans and ordinary people to believe that kindness still matters, that integrity still has value, and that doing what is right always pays off, even when it takes time to be recognized. A few months after all that transformation, Cole decided to return to the diner where everything had begun. It was a Saturday morning, with the sky partly cloudy but no rain, and he took Mia with him for breakfast. When they walked in, the waitress who had worked that fateful day immediately recognized him and came over to greet him with a warm smile, saying she had heard about everything that had happened through conversations in town. Cole sat at the same counter where he'd been that rainy morning, ordered the same simple breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, but this time without the worry of how he would pay the bills at the end of the day. Mia, excited, talked about her new school and the friends she was making, and Cole listened with full attention, grateful for every second of that new reality. As he looked out the diner window, Cole saw other customers arriving, workers, families, veterans like him, all carrying their own invisible battles and fighting to build a dignified life in a small town where everyone knows each other. He thought about how each person there had their own story of struggle and overcoming, and how small gestures of kindness could make a monumental difference in someone's trajectory. Cole knew he would never forget that rainy morning, not only for what it had meant to Emily or to himself, but for what it represented about human nature, the capacity to choose compassion even when it's difficult, to act with integrity even when no one is watching, and to believe that good always finds a way back. Before leaving the diner, Cole left a generous tip for the waitress, not just as thanks for the service, but as a small gesture of kindness that he hoped would continue circulating in the community. Holding Mia's hand and walking toward the truck, he looked back one last time, seeing the simple diner, with its foggy windows and red vinyl tables, and felt a deep gratitude that that place had been the setting where his life completely changed. It wasn't just a roadside restaurant. It was the symbol that kindness still exists, that hope is still worthwhile, and that even in the darkest moments, The light of human compassion can illuminate the way back home. The legacy of that rainy morning would continue to live not only in the lives of Cole and Emily, but in all those who would be touched by their stories in the following years. Cole, through his work at the Carter Foundation, would help dozens of veterans find purpose and stability after military service. Emily, resuming her career as a documentary filmmaker, would tell human stories with more depth and empathy, always remembering that behind every tragedy are real people who deserve dignity and respect. And Mia, growing up in a more stable and loving home, would learn through her father's example that true wealth is not in what you have, but in what you do for others when no one is asking for anything in return. That afternoon, driving back home with Mia singing in the back seat, Cole Harrison finally made peace with his past, accepted his present, and looked toward the future with renewed hope. The journey had not been easy, and he knew new challenges would come. But now he had something he didn't have before, the certainty that he was not alone, that his kindness had created deep roots in a community that valued him, and that the legacy he would leave for Mia would be much more than money or possessions. It would be the living example that integrity, compassion, and honor are still the most powerful forces capable of transforming lives and building a better world. The diner remained there on the side of the coastal road like a silent lighthouse, reminding all who passed that sometimes miracles happen in the simplest places, through the most humble people, and that kindness always finds a way back, not necessarily the way we expect, but always the way we most need.